Hi everyone, welcome back to another game. Here we have Teimour Radjabov playing white and Maxime Vachier-Lagrave playing black. And this game was played in the World Cup semi-finals 2019. So Radjabov began knight to f3. We have knight to f6 by MVL, c4, c5, knight c3, d5, striking at the center. C takes d5, knight takes d5, e3, knight takes c3, and now d takes c3, offering a queen trade. MVL did not want a queen trade. MVL played queen to c7. If we just look here, queen takes d1, king takes d1. White is ready to play e4 here, so black would play bishop f5, or bishop f5 is quite a logical move. And now white might insist on playing e4 with knight to d2, and this kind of position, I mean, it's virtually equal, but maybe white is just a little more comfortable here. Especially this pawn on c3 is quite nicely placed because it covers b4 and d4 and therefore restricts this knight on c6. And let's say bishop g6, f3, you know, I think anyone would just prefer to play white here. But anyway, queen to c7 was played rather than trading queens. We have e4, and the point of e4 is to gain some central space, control d5, control f5, and open up the diagonal for this bishop to develop, perhaps in the future. e6, and the important thing to note here is that, well, black doesn't have a knight on f6 anymore. If you remember, the knight came to d5 and traded itself on c3. And because of that, now the black king side, it's a little bit weak. Without a knight on f6, you know, you can imagine h7, g7, etc. becoming under fire when black castles. And therefore, Radjabov immediately aimed his pieces at the black king side. So bishop to d3, immediately eyeing the h7 pawn, which there's no knight to defend anymore. Bishop to e7, queen to e2. And once again, white's thinking of playing e5 and queen e4 in the future, which is a very powerful idea. Bishop to d7, castles, castles, and e5. And now you can see what I'm talking about quite clearly. h7 looks really quite vulnerable here. g7 is also a weak point in the black position. And this pawn on e5 is a key pawn in white's position here. It controls d6 and f6, which are two important squares, and it gains space for white. And already, queen e4 is looking like a pretty powerful idea for white. And therefore, bishop to c6 was played by MVL, preventing queen to e4, and this is a good diagonal for the bishop. But Radjabov immediately, knight to g5, exploiting the weaknesses on the black king side. Okay, as white we are threatening the h7 pawn, and well, MVL played h6. Alternatives, if you take the knight, well, white's just going to take back, and yeah, white's got a pretty big advantage here. You've got the two bishops, and the black king is just as vulnerable as ever. This pawn on e5 is still monstrous. White is doing really well here. Also, g6 is just another alternative, but it's just a really weakening move. Now the dark squares are looking pretty bad. So therefore h6 was played by MVL, but now Radjabov played bishop to h7 check, king to h8, and now bishop to c2, and this is a really nice maneuver. If you remember the position before, the bishop was on d3, but now the bishop is on c2, and therefore queen d3 is becoming a very strong idea for white. And yeah, of course, if black takes the knight, then you're going to play queen h5 and mate on h7. Likewise, if bishop takes knight, bishop takes bishop, and now, well, black cannot take that because once again, there's just going to be a mate on h7. So after this bishop c2 move, queen d3 is a pretty big threat. So therefore MVL played c4, which is quite a nice move here. basically just preventing queen to d3. And if you take on c4, well, now black can take on g5, and black's just going to be a piece up. So therefore, after c4, rook to e1 by Radjabov, supporting the strong e5 pawn. The knight on g5 still cannot be taken. Queen to d8. Now MVL is threatening the knight on g5 because the queen also puts pressure on it with the bishop. And here Radjabov, this is a typical position from a strong player. He doesn't just retreat the knight to an obvious square such as e4 or f3. Sorry, f3. He thinks, where would this knight best be placed? And, well, that's this f4 square, which is a fantastic square for the knight. So he moves the knight to h3. And it's just little things like that which makes these guys so powerful. Queen to d5, threatening mate on g2, but the knight comes to f4 really nicely, attacking the queen, defending the pawn. Yeah, this is looking good for white. Queen to c5, bishop to b1, and now queen to c2 is a really strong idea for white. When I was analysing this, originally I thought knight h5 also looks really strong because, I mean, if you look at all these weak squares in the black position and all white's pieces are just aiming right at them. But it turns out that after rook to g8, black seems to have everything covered. If you try bishop to b1 now, well, black's going to play knight to d7, and the knight's going to come back to f8, g6 is going to be played, and black seems to be doing quite well, in fact, here. So therefore, after queen c5, not knight h5, but bishop to b1 by white. And as you can see, queen to c2 is coming. Bishop to g5 was played, and yeah, MVL maybe didn't know what to do about this queen c2 move because it is incredibly strong. The problem with bishop to g5 is now there's this move knight takes e6. If you play queen to c2, then g6 actually seems to sort of work for black because this sack looks really tempting. But if you come in like this with the queen, well, queen takes f2 and white is the one who's going to be mated. So therefore, after bishop to g5, not queen to c2, but knight takes e6. Always be on the lookout for these tactical ideas. What's the point? Well, white's attacking the queen and the bishop and the rook with the knight, so you've got to take that piece. And now bishop takes g5. And white is up a pawn. You cannot take this bishop because of the standard mating maneuver, queen to h5 check, king to g8, bishop to h7 check, king h8, and now bishop g6, key move controlling the f7 square, so that after king to g8, queen to h7, it's mate, and the king cannot come to f7 because the bishop defends it. So after bishop takes g5, queen to d5 by MVL, threatening mate on g2. The queen comes to g4, you still cannot take that bishop. Knight to d7, and now bishop to e4. And yeah, white is just dominating here. Knight takes e5 was played. If you try queen takes e5 here, well, just bishop takes c6. And after queen takes g5, queen takes g5, h takes g5, bishop takes d7. White has won a piece. So after bishop to e4, knight takes e5 by MVL. But now Radjabov plays another really great move, just queen to h5. And yeah, there's just enormous pressure here. Queen to b5, bishop takes h6. And now if g takes h6, of course, you're just going to get mated again, like that. So therefore, after bishop takes h6, MVL plays bishop takes e4. And you've got to be careful here as white. Radjabov correctly played bishop to f4 check. If you play rook takes e4, and it seems like a really natural move, then black would actually win with knight to f3 check. And this is a discovered attack on the queen, and you're checking. So if g takes knight, you're just going to lose your queen, and of course if queen takes knight, well, rook takes queen is going to win for black as well. So therefore, after bishop takes e4, bishop to f4 check by Radjabov, which is a great move. After king to g8, he just took the knight on e5, and white is just up a piece, up a pawn, and black's pawns are really weak. And bishop to d5 by black. And here I'd like to briefly talk about a concept for white, which I have looked at before in some of my videos, which AlphaZero has used to great effect. It's the fact that when there are opposite coloured bishops and the heavy pieces remain on the board, it makes weaknesses, especially around the king, really stand out. So if we look for weaknesses here, then we can see that g7 and g2 are both vulnerable points in both sides' positions, but more so for black. And if you can imagine, for example, this white bishop playing bishop to e5, of course not right now because the queen is on e5, but if you can imagine bishop to e5 being played and then attacking g7 and a rook coming to say g3, black's going to really struggle to defend g7 because the bishop on d5 is just the wrong colour to defend it. So for the rest of the game, we just see Radjabov piling up on the g7 pawn, and you can really learn from this, as I have won and lost some games in these types of positions. So rook to e2, rook to f5, queen e3, queen to g6, and to his credit, queen to e8, sorry, to his credit, MVL is trying to get at this g2 pawn, but the problem is, well, Radjabov is up a pawn, so he just plays f3, and now black's not got any real weaknesses to attack and can only defend, but it's just not enough. Queen to g6, h4, rook f8, bishop to g5, a6, rook to d1, queen e8, rook to d4, queen to c6, and rook to g4. Okay, this is one piece, taking aim at g7, kh7, bishop f4, and here the bishop is moving to e5. Once again, we are aiming at this weak pawn. Rook f7, bishop e5, second piece is in place, b5, and now a third piece to attack g7, queen f2, queen d7, queen g3. And you can see how vulnerable this g7 pawn is because this bishop on d5 just cannot defend it. Rook to h5, bishop to d4, queen to c7, rook to e5, and black is just collapsing. Rook on h to f5, rook to g5, king to g8, and finally one last piece looking to pressure g7. The h5 pawn is going to be ready to come to h6 soon. Rook takes g5, queen takes g5, queen to e7, queen to g4. And now I suppose MVL sort of blundered with rook to f5, and after queen takes f5 he resigned because, well, you're just winning a full rook. That being said, black is completely lost anyway here. I mean, find a move for black. Let's say queen to d7, well, h6 by white, and followed up with something like rook to g5, and black is just going to lose. So a really brilliant game by Radjabov, and this means he has qualified for the candidates tournament in the World Championship cycle. So I look forward to seeing him play there. Okay, thank you very much for watching.